Steve Marinucci, freelance writer on Billboard.com, Variety.com, Access.com, Goldmine, and wherever I can put my byline, saying welcome to another Things We Said Today, our weekly talk show where we discuss the Beatles, past, present, and maybe to come. Let me introduce my two co-hosts. First, from the state of Connecticut, the host of the Beatles show Every Little Thing, Mr. Ken Michaels. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody.
And the legendary host, former host of the Beatles desk at the New York Times, who now writes for the Wall Street Journal and other publications, our musicologist and all-time Beatles expert, Mr. Alan Kozin. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Steve. Hello, everyone.
Today we're going to talk about the evolution of George Harrison as a songwriter. That's going to be our topic. But first we're going to get some news out of the way. The big news is the fact that the Beatles are going to release a 7-inch Yellow Submarine Eleanor Rigby picture disc single on July 6th to go along with the reissue in the theaters of the movie. And for those who have been wondering if the mixes on the single are going to be anything new, they are not. They're going to be from 1 and 1 Plus, according to a source I talked to. So, yep, that's what's coming. Any of you guys want to comment on that?
Well, so in a way, it is new as a single because those mixes haven't been on a single before. I mean, that's pretty minor.
Oh, okay.
Minor detail,
yeah,
but
minor detail, right?
Yeah.
Ken?
Just something else for the collector.
Yep, exactly. Another news was the starting of Ringo's tour. He started June 1st in Atlantic City, and he added a couple of songs to the set. They did make some changes. They have Graham Gouldman now on the tour, and they brought back Colin Hay. I think I'm going to run down the set list here in case anybody hasn't heard the whole thing. Starting, and I don't think I have to tell you who sang what, but Matchbox, It Don't Come Easy, What Goes On, Dreadlock Holiday, which is Graham Gouldman for anybody that doesn't know. I certainly didn't. Evil Ways, Rosanna, Down Under, Boys, Don't Pass Me By, Yellow Submarine, I'm Not in Love, Black Magic Woman, Gypsy Queen, You're 16, Anthem, Overkill, Africa, Oye Como Va, I Want to Be Your Man, Things We Do for Love, Who Can It Be Now, Hold the Line, Photograph, Act Naturally, and With a Little Help from My Friends. Anyone want to comment on those songs?
Well, I'm certainly thrilled about the 3 Graham Gouldman songs, and I expected I'm Not in Love, and I expected the Things We Do for Love, but the third song, Dreadlock Holiday, was a nice surprise, and that was actually a song that got quite a bit of airplay on rock radio here. It's a reggae song in which they sing I Don't Like Reggae. So I'm sure many people listening to the show know that song. So it should be familiar, I would hope, to most. But when we were talking about Graham Gouldman earlier, when we first heard that he was going to be a new addition, we were wondering if any of the songs that he wrote in the 60s might be added. And apparently not. Like For Your Love for the Yardbirds. Sure. Songs like that. So it's going to be strictly the 10cc songs. And it's nice that Ringo brought back Anthem. Mm-hmm. There's so many songs in his catalog I wish he would do that he's never done live before, but at least there's that change. Mm-hmm. And something like You're 16, he did do recently when he toured, but it was the first time in a long time that he did You're 16. I think he felt uncomfortable in his age singing a song with those lyrics, You're 16, you're beautiful in your mind, which is ridiculous. It's just a song. That's all it is. It was a big hit, Don't take it so seriously. But I'm very happy with the set list. And everybody else is playing the same songs. And the Colin Hay songs are the same 3 that he did when he toured with Ringo. And he's got to do Who Could It Be Now and Down Under. And I'm so thrilled that he's still doing Overkill, which is a great Men at Work song. Mm-hmm. Wonderful song with a great build-up in it, too, and works very well live. So, yeah, I'm very happy with the set list.
Alan?
Yeah, it sounds like a nice set list. As you say, not an awful lot new apart from the Graham Gouldman things, and some slight changes in Ringo's set. But it sounds like a nice show, and that's really all Ringo intends to do. I mean, from the very start in 1989, when the first one of these tours came out. I mean, I remember what he said about it. He said, we're not trying to break anybody's brains. We just want everyone to have a good time. And, that's a legitimate entertainment world aspiration. So I think he does a good job of it.
Right, and that's what they've been doing, and it's worked out. It's become a great thing for him. I really, there were other bands doing this kind of thing. I mean, there were other touring acts that were using this kind of formula, but he's really made it his own. And, for what it's worth, it's good that he's still out there doing it.
He's always said these are the songs you know and love.
Right.
But the one thing I must say that I do miss about his shows is that he used to always have solo numbers. By that I mean one of the members would come out on stage and do something alone, usually. And if you went to two shows in a row, you might get different members of the All-Stars doing their own to numbers. So it would be slightly different. Mm-hmm. And I kind of miss that. It added something special. Mm-hmm. Whereas now it's pretty much the same from show to show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's also a current John and Yoko exhibit, and I believe is that a Beatles story in Liverpool? I believe that's where that is. And Yoko and Sean went for the opening of that, and there were pictures of them out there, and they visited Mendips, and it was great to see Yoko out and about again. I wish I could say we have a report about that, but we don't. But the reports on it are really good. So.
Yoko also visited John's home at Newcastle Road, where he lived with Julia. So it was that and Mendips.
Okay.
It's supposed to be the first time she ever went to the home in Newcastle.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I think she's been to Mendips before, I think.
Yeah, she has. Yeah, they have.
But,
yeah, she has.
But Newcastle, I think this was the first time.
Mm-hmm. And then one day I happened to discover on Amazon, there's an ebook, and it's available in print also, but there's a ebook that's available free called Life on Two Legs by Norman Sheffield. And what got my attention was the book has an introduction by Paul McCartney, and the first chapter is on the recording of Hey Jude, and it mentions Peter Asher very prominently in the chapter. But if you are a Kindle person like I am, and you like free Kindle books, I mean, that's something you might want to hunt down. It's also available on their Kindle Unlimited or something, that deal where you pay $10 a month, but you can get it free without it. So, I mean, if you go to Amazon and look, you may have to kind of move around and do some hunting for the free link to buy it, but it is free. So, but it's an interesting book. I started looking at it, and like I said, Peter Asher is mentioned prominently in the first chapter.
You should say what the book is about.
Oh, Norman Sheffield. Thank you. Thank you. Norman Sheffield is the guy who founded Trident Studios, which is why he talks about the recording of Hey Jude. And it got when I posted it, the day I posted it on my Beatles group, Tony Bramwell chimed in and said that Sheffield had just passed, and that he was a great guy. So he gave kind of a little bit of an endorsement to the book. So there you go. Another exhibit that has opened and is running through next March is the Rock on TV exhibit at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And that has a bunch of different things in it, including the stage designs from the Beatles Ed Sullivan Show. So that's interesting. And finally, I'm going to mention this very briefly. I just found out about this the other day. This album is at least 5 years old. I believe it's called Queen's English by a surf band called the Malibooz, Malibooz. And what they've done with the album is they've done a bunch of original songs in 60s British invasion style. But the real kicker here is who's on the album with them. And I was floored when I read this list. It's here's the list: Spencer Davis, Andrew Loog Oldham, Tony Hicks of the Hollies, Chad Stewart and Jeremy Clyde, Colin Hanton, Rod Davis, and Len Gary of the Quarrymen, Peter Jameson and Richard Moore of the Trogs, John Farrar and Mark Griffiths of the Shadows, Noki Edwards of the Ventures, David Carr of the Fortunes and the Ventures, and Ian Whitcomb. The album is available on Amazon. Oh, and the cover shot was taken by Jared Mankiewicz, who did photographs for the Rolling Stones and Jimi Hendrix. And the tracks were mastered at Abbey Road. So the album, I saw the album today on Amazon. It's there. So if you want a copy of it, that's where to get it. So anyway, we were going to talk about the music of the development of George Harrison as a writer in the Beatles. And
in the Beatle years.
In the Beatle years. Thank you. Obviously, there's a whole list starting with In Spite of All the Danger and Cry for Shadow, which he co-wrote. And I found it was interesting. I found a quote where he talked about Cry for Shadow and said that it had been written. He said, someone asked John and myself how the tune went, and we tried to demonstrate. It wasn't a bit like Apache, but we liked it and used it in the act a while. We even called it Cry for a Shadow. But it was originally, I think, somewhat of a George originally had compared it with Apache. So, but the title Cry for a Shadow is a reference to the Shadows, which is kind of interesting. That's cute.
Well, and the fact that it was a guitar-driven instrumental,
right,
sort of in the Shadows style. But I think they say they didn't like the Shadows much, so that in a way it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek, not exactly a tribute, but you know,
a dig.
yeah, sort of.
I would have trouble totally believing that. Maybe it was, but it doesn't sound like a dig to me. Does it sound like a dig to you guys?
I don't really know for sure, because
what was that again?
It's a great instrumental. I think it's a great instrumental.
Yeah.
For something that was done that early, it really holds up just by itself. And it's it's been used so much for music beds. Whenever I'm doing anything in radio or hear anything on the Beatles on the radio. And I did want to mention In Spite of All the Danger, because I'm sure that you know that Paul said, since it's listed as being written by Paul and George, that George really didn't write the song. He just gave him a songwriting credit because he came up with the guitar solo in it.
Right. Which could be the same as for Cry for a Shadow, except that the guitar solo is the whole thing.
Right. Well, that was nice of Paul to give him the credit. Good grief. Well, if he gives him the guitar lick, why wouldn't you credit him? I don't know. That seems weird to me. But
then why doesn't Paul get credit for Taxman? Why is that not a Harrison McCartney song?
Well, we haven't gotten there yet, so okay.
We can turn this into a whole different show,
Yeah.
That's true.
Talk about "And I Love Her" and the fact that George came up with those four notes. Da 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 dum. Why didn't he get a songwriting credit there?
Okay.
Because there was a Lennon-McCartney partnership, and they didn't want to interfere with that. So,
starting with the Beatles, we have "Don't Bother Me," which the early that list of early songs going through from "Don't Bother Me," you know what to do, "I Need You," you like me too much, "Think for Yourself," and "If I Needed Someone," all to me have a very distinct introspective quality. And I mean, there were Lennon and McCartney songs that were somewhat introspective like that, but not to the extent that these were, at least to me. It's great that he got very personal, and he wasn't afraid to get personal in his early songs. And anybody want to say anything there?
Yeah, I don't know that they're that personal. I think they give the impression of being personal, like "Don't Bother Me." I mean, but we don't know if that's really a personal expression or just an idea for a song that he had.
Well, sure, that's true too.
I do think that those early songs, have a certain sort of tentativeness where he's not so sure about his songwriting, and he even says about "Don't Bother Me" in "I Me Mine." It's my first song. I don't know if it's a song at all, and I think that's going too far. It's a song. I kind of like it as a song, and I think that with those early songs, while on one hand you can sense that he's a little tentative and maybe a little awed by what John and Paul are putting out. I think the fact that the arrangements that Beatles did as a group kind of really helped put them over the top. I mean, there's nothing tentative about a performance of like "You Like Me Too Much." I mean, that's it sizzles in its way. So and "Think for Yourself." That's kind of interesting. I see what you mean by introspective, given "Don't Bother Me," "Think for Yourself," these kind of Beach Boys in my room kind of things, which is usually John's territory.
Right. They were more like teenage. It was more like teenage stuff, really. Kind of like what Brian Wilson. Again,
"Think for Yourself." "Think for Yourself" is a bit beyond that, because it's
right.
Yeah.
Here he's really, that's really pretty assertive. "Think for yourself, because I won't be there with you."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. But George has this knack, as we've pointed out before, especially when he got into his solo career, about writing songs that could be interpreted as either being for God or for a woman. "Think for Yourself" can have different meanings. Mm-hmm. It could be about a specific relationship. It doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship.
Right.
It's a relationship that he's struggling with another person. Mm-hmm. But it could also just be about, think for yourself, think independently. You're on your own. That kind of an attitude. So, I love the fact that early on, George is writing songs that could have more than one meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When I think about George in particular, well, it's a fascinating thing that even early on, John, Paul, and George, their songwriting styles were very different from each other.
Yeah.
The songs that George wrote, in most cases, I couldn't really hear John sing or Paul sing. There was so much. They were so George, and even "Don't Bother Me," it was so unique and distinctive, stylistically and musically. It stands out. You can tell that it's a different song from what John would write or what Paul would write. Mm-hmm. And I got to give George a lot of credit, since he didn't have a songwriting partner all those years. Everything he had to do by himself. Although John was to say that he helped him out with Taxman, But for the most part, George had to do everything on his own. Mm-hmm. And "You Like Me Too Much" is a song that I've really grown to appreciate more now. Very interesting, just the introduction, that rollicking piano intro, kind of unique for its time. But even it's kind of comical. "You like me too much, but I like you." And I like you. He's always, even then, it's the start of the humorous side of George. So, there are seeds of it early on in those early songs.
Mm-hmm. I really like "I Need To." That the mix and the way he used that guitar intro in there. I always loved that, the way he did that. With that guitar, I thought that was pretty beautiful. And "If I Needed Someone" is kind of on the same lines. I really like what he did with both of those songs musically. Alan,
I have one quibble with what Ken said. I mean, while I basically agree that John, Paul, and George all had distinctive styles, and that George definitely, even in these early songs, those weren't things John or Paul would sing, or that you could imagine them singing particularly. But you could say the same thing in a way for "Do You Want to Know a Secret" and "I'm Happy Just to Dance with You." I mean, those were Lennon-McCartney songs, but George completely made them his own with his performance, and I feel that they're like inseparable from him. And if they had said by George Harrison, I would have believed it. See what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
I don't know. I couldn't think of "Do You Want to Know a Secret" as being written by George. I really couldn't. Or even "I'm Happy Just to Dance with You." I could actually hear John sing those songs.
I again, getting back to the innocence of the lyrics on the early songs, I definitely could. I definitely think that's a good point. You don't think the innocence in those lyrics is Harrison-like, Ken?
No, it has more to do with the musicality and the structure of it and the melody. Even George's melodies are always different. He always stands out between John and Paul. Even early on, I think so. I mean, you think of "You Like Me Too Much." I mean, that melody is so different from what John and Paul would write, to me. He developed a style that was all his own even early on. And then he flourished later on, obviously, later in the Beatles and in his solo career. But even still, I mean, "Don't Bother Me" sticks out like a sore thumb with the Beatles, as far as I'm concerned. So,
in what respect? What do you mean? As far as
it just sounds so unique as a composition. It doesn't sound like something that John or Paul would write. And lyrically, again, George. A lot of what he writes about tends to be on the negative side, even though it could be humorous, like "You Like Me Too Much." But even then, "Don't Bother Me." I just think it's got a great hook to it, and just the sound of it. It's just very different from other songs on with the Beatles. There are similarities in songs on with the Beatles, but "Don't Bother Me" kind of sticks out from John songs or Paul songs.
Okay. I see. For me, I think "I Need You" is the one that really sticks out, and also "If I Needed Someone." But
sticks out in what way?
Lyrically and musically, I think they were.
Are you saying that's when he came into his own?
No, actually, when he came into his own, I hold to these first songs as a group. I think lyrically, or when he came into his own, were the next songs. I think that's where was his turning point.
Sure,
that was his turning point. But in these early songs, I think "I Need You" and "If I Needed Someone" were the best. I think so. I think they were the best of that group.
Well, you're just talking about the quality of his music. I'm only just talking about his developing a style that was unique, and I think he had it from the get-go.
Okay. Would both of you agree that "Taxman" was a very sharp turning point?
Sure, probably. Although, "If I Needed Someone" was, I think the Rubber Soul songs show a lot of growth beyond the ones he did through Help, which were only a few. I think, on one hand, "If I Needed Someone," I mean, musically is really pretty simple. I mean, again, in "I Me Mine," he talks about how it's one of many songs that are just based on variations on a D chord, adding the suspended fourth and taking it off, and then, how you can do. You all play guitar, right?
Yes.
So it's just taking that triangular shape of a second fret D chord, and then moving the top string on and off, and adding the pinky on the next fret. It's actually a nice little trick that the Byrds did all the time. The Hollies did a bit of too, which is probably, the Byrds was probably the sound he was after in that when he was writing that, and the Hollies picked it up, and it seemed sort of natural for them, although he didn't seem to like their version very much.
Well, you mean the Bells of Rimney
Mm-hmm.
from the Byrds, which George said was an influence
Right.
on If I Needed Someone.
Exactly.
Okay. I do feel, though, that Think for Yourself was a leap. I
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
mean, I Need You and You Like Me Too Much are nice, and they're about relationships. They're not deep songs. Think for Yourself lyrically is much deeper and a little bit more complex.
Right. He definitely got into the musical effects a little more there. He got a little more psychedelic with that.
And
Definitely.
also, you reach a point in that middle period, 65 and 66, where the Beatles are talking about their minds, and
Hmm.
there's a great line in Think for Yourself, although your mind's opaque. Even using the word opaque is unique
Mm-hmm.
in a song,
Right.
Try
Right.
thinking more of just for your own sake. I mean, you're talking about the mind there, you're talking about the brain. And so it's a little bit more than just, you know, I like you and you like me, or I love you and you love me. There's a little bit more going on there. So,
Right. Right.
mm,
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. The next group, I think we'll skip 12 Bar Original because that really doesn't enter into the discussion at all. But starting with Revolver, we have Taxman, Love You Too, I Want to Tell You.
Three very
That
different songs.
three very different songs, but also, in my view, a very sharp turn in his development. He started to become a lot more competition to Lennon and McCartney at that point.
Mm-hmm. And Taxman is pretty outspoken
Right.
by their standards about a political issue, and directly name checking British politicians and everything, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Heath,
Hmm.
mm,
and really taking issue with the fact that they were in the 95% tax bracket, which I guess I would take issue with too.
mm.
Right.
I wonder, I'd really be interested in the discussions among them, since they hadn't been overtly political up to that point. I mean, even in press conferences, I mean, they tended to skirt it until the 66 tour, and then they began to talk a bit. But I wonder if there was any discussion among them about whether they wanted to get into that, and they must have been all behind it, because not only did they agree to have it on the album, they made it the opening track.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Boy, that was a statement,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Didn't I'm trying to remember. Didn't George actually change the lyrics?
Yeah,
Didn't he say when he did it live? Didn't he mention? Did he? Who else did he mention besides
Oh, he
Mr. Wilson?
updated it.
Right.
He mentioned George Bush, meaning the first president, George Bush.
Right.
It was Mr. Bush, but I'm trying to remember who else he mentioned in there.
Right. I thought he had updated it. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, he got very political. I mean, that wasn't totally unusual for him. I mean, he did get political at times, but that was a very significant political statement for him. Love You Too was a very again, go back to what you said earlier, Ken, about it being unique. That was a very unique title, because it actually, in terms of English, doesn't totally make sense to say Love You
No.
Too. And so it was interesting in that respect, but also the song itself was a great song. As was I Want to Tell You. They both are.
I think it makes sense. I mean, from a certain perspective. I mean, if I were to say to you, Steve, are you going to send me $600,000 tomorrow? Or if you were saying, can I send you $600,000 tomorrow? I'd say, love you to.
Well, okay.
But yeah, you do expect
Somehow
you do expect two O's on that too, and
Right,
yeah.
but that's not what he was. If you look at the lyrics, actually, I guess it does, because he says, "I'll make love to you if you want me to."
Yeah.
So
But
I
he
guess.
says,
Go
he
ahead.
says to you. He says, I'll make love to you, not you to.
Right, right.
So,
He says if you want me
But
to, so he's basically saying love you to.
but he's using the word to rather than too, and here we are arguing about English. Um,
When the
you
main
know,
thing about the song is that it's probably, I think it's the first Indian instrument song that the Beatles did.
Well, built around completely Indian musicians,
Hmm.
mhm.
you know, as opposed to Norwegian wood using a sitar for a folk song.
Right. Yeah, just as a piece of
So,
color. But here we take the next step into, okay, this is what this Indian stuff is really about. Well, kind of about, at least in terms of a short pop song.
Mm-hmm.
mm.
What
And
did you
then
guys
without,
think of it when it came out?
what did I think? What did we think of it?
Yeah.
I mean, oh, that's hard to say. To be honest, I remember listening to the 8-track tape version in a department store. After school, I used to go to this auto department in a local department store and sit there and play Revolver. They didn't kick me out either, but that's what I used to do, and I remember listening to the whole album there. But I don't know what to say. I mean, the whole album is great. I mean, it's not. I don't know that it's my favorite song on the album.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I'm pretty sure that I had never heard anything like that at the time with those instruments and those kinds of sounds. And,
okay.
and I think, I mean, it's hard to remember because it was, like 52 years ago. But I think, that my friends and I were a little puzzled by it. Like, what is this? And is this, like, what are the Beatles doing? You know?
Well, the way he intertwined the instruments with the words, the way it started, each day just goes so fast. I turn around, it's past. You don't get time to hang a sign on me. It's very different. It's not what we were used to on the radio back then.
Right.
It was it was the beginning of that whole, real psychedelic turn that they made. That was one of the first. That was one of the first steps, really. But I liked it. I mean, I don't remember not liking it. It was one of the earliest turns towards psychedelia that they had done, and it was definitely different from a lot of the music that we were hearing on the radio in those days. They were miles ahead of the Beatles. It was interesting in the interview I did recently with Mike Nesmith. He was talking about how far ahead the Beatles were, that they were just blowing everybody's mind completely, and it's the truth. They really were. And this is kind of an early indication of where things were headed.
An early clue to the new direction.
Early clue to the new direction, yeah. Yep.
In my case, I was a little kid when all the Beatles music came out. So even though I was enjoying it, I wasn't processing, all these radical changes. I was enjoying each song as it happened. And I was noticing the uniqueness on certain songs. And certainly the introduction on Love You Too just stood out for me. What other song starts out like that?
Yeah.
And the fact that, an entire song was built around, Indian instruments. Yeah. And I hadn't really heard that before. And then later on, you go to love the melody. And there is something about George with this negativism that he puts in his songs, even going back to Don't Bother Me, his first song. But, lines like, there's people standing around who'll screw you in the ground. He's putting that in this song. And at the same time, it's very interesting what you said, Steve, about, psychedelic and thinking psychedelic, because sometimes I think a lot of people tend to associate psychedelic with Day in the Life, Tomorrow Never Knows, those songs, I Am the Walrus, but they may not associate the Indian stuff that way. And, it's part of it. It definitely is. Love You Too is definitely psychedelic, as was Within You, Without You. I definitely feel that way. But just the whole idea of all that instrumentation and George Harrison and George Martin getting behind that and coming up with that whole arrangement. Same thing I could say about Within You, Without You. So, but this being an earlier example of it all, and the fact that the Beatles were doing this and George was so young writing a song like this, built around Indian instruments, it's just staggering now when I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Alan, you have anything else to comment?
No, I think I've said pretty much what I have to say about that song. But unless you sort of look at the three Indian instrument songs he did, there were only three actually in the whole Beatles canon, which were "Love You To," "Within You, Without You," and "The Inner Light." I think that the fact that he did three of them, I suspect he would have done a lot more of them if he felt that both the other Beatles and their fans and George Martin would allow it. But I think that he sort of understood that you couldn't do too much. I think he may have still been interested to some degree in conventional songwriting, as his other two songs on Revolver show. But I think what these three songs show really are, he was not just dabbling in Indian music. He was really passionate about it, and he wanted to share his feelings about it with the other Beatles, with his listeners. And I don't think any other group went that far. I mean, lots of people used the sitar, and they used it more or less the way it was used in Norwegian Wood, maybe a little bit spacier, a little more psychedelic, but it's still an effect. Whereas he's basically saying in these three songs, no, it's not just an effect. There's a style of songwriting here. There are traditions of how songs go together in the Indian musical world, and I want to show you some of that because I love it. And, and that was it was interesting for him to do, and I think it actually did a real service to for the world in a way, because it turned us on to other Indian things. I mean, because he was interested in Ravi Shankar, I began listening to Ravi Shankar records just to see what it was about, and that's not nothing, I mean, to aside from selling your own song, to turn people on to a whole different kind of music is really a great thing.
Exactly. Yeah, because this was the start of world music being introduced on a massive level like this.
Right.
And you got to give George Harrison the credit for that.
Right. And it wasn't just a fad with him. I mean, it was something that that he showed was dear to him several times in his life. I mean, Bangladesh was another example. The fact that the Concert for George again had Ravi there playing, there were, and all the collaborations they did together. So,
right. And don't forget, he saved a lot of, his desire to record Indian music for Wonderwall. There's a mixture of Indian music there and rock music on that album. And then, he did produce some albums for Ravi Shankar too.
Right. Let's move to Sgt. Pepper and Within You, Without You, which really turns the corner in terms of lyrics and music, because the lyrics, he got very deep in those lyrics. We were talking about the space between us all and the people who hide themselves behind a wall of illusion. Just those first two lines are really a kick as far as, where he had been before. He really pushed the envelope in terms of where he, what he was doing now. And the instrumentation on that song, which we've heard, in the deluxe box set that just came out, is absolutely stunning. And I'm glad that song is getting a little more respect than it did. It was funny, though, that he kind of did a little self-deprecating thing to it. I assume that was him with the laughter on the original album. That's that's kind of that. I mean, I suppose that's typical George to do that. But Ken?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I've said many times on this show that Within You, Without You is like, of all the songs that I've come to appreciate so much more now than ever before, that's the one on every level. the marriage of the Indian musicians with the Western musicians and the orchestration, combining the two. And you got to give George Martin a lot of credit for that too, not just George Harrison. But and it's fascinating to listen to the Sgt. Pepper, the remaster, with George giving instructions to what he wants to the Indian musicians. I love that. And then lyrically, the fact that he came up with those lines, and you got to figure this is 1967. George wrote this song when he was 24. And here's somebody who had the world at his feet. The four Beatles were the four most popular people on the planet. And here he is saying a line like, and to see you're really only very small. You know? Just to have the wisdom to know that you're just one of millions of people in the world, you know, and to have the Indian philosophy there nailed down the way that he did. And, you know, he was becoming more and more centered with that kind of philosophy. And the lyrics are so brilliant. The melody is great. You know, I just think that it's such a stunning piece of music. It's a great song, and it's a great recording. And on every level, I mean, this was a progression at, you know, at its finest. You could say that about what John and Paul were writing at the time. I really feel this way about George, although, let's face it, the later songs of George, those are stunning songs too. But when you combine everything else that goes into it, you know, all that instrumentation and the lyrics, it's just, this is a masterpiece to me. And when I was younger, I couldn't possibly comprehend this. It was way over my head. And now I look at it as being beyond brilliant.
I think it was way over everybody's head back in '67. I mean,
yeah, you know, it was. I mean, and especially having heard "Love You Too," I know that a lot of my friends were feeling like, okay, what are we now going to have one of these on every album? And this one is 5 minutes long, and you know, but at least it's the first cut on the album, so you could start the side 2 with "When I'm 64." You know, I mean, people used to skip it. But George Martin, too, has said that, you know, he didn't like it that much at the time, and yet he produced a brilliant orchestral score to go with it. And the interplay between the Indian musicians and the orchestral musicians is fantastic. But yeah, you know, that was one of those things that I think, you know, with both of those songs, "Love You Too" and this, George was really sort of way ahead of the world. And it took the world a long time to catch up and realize that not only is this actually not a bad song, it's really one of the highlights of Sgt. Pepper. And to be a highlight of Sgt. Pepper, I mean, you know, it's Sgt. Pepper, for God's sake. You know, that's something. But this is the development between "Love You Too" and this is also stunning. I was just going to say, this is a far more sophisticated use of the materials and a lot more thought through, simply musically, forgetting about the lyrics. But yeah.
It really tells you something how on the Beatles anthology, they just released the orchestration on Volume 2, that part, without the Indian instruments. And on the remaster, they had just the Indian instruments. So you could separate the two and hear both and just see all the work that was poured into it.
Alan, could you talk a little bit? I mean, I know we've gone through this before, but just a little bit of the complexity of the arrangements on that song. Could you kind of talk about that for, you know, from a musicologist point of view? Can you do that? If that's a tough question, you don't have to answer it, but go ahead.
Yeah. You know, I think it's actually very apparent to the ear, and it's especially apparent to the ear once you've heard the track on the deluxe edition that was released last year, where George is teaching the Indian musicians what he wants. He's talking to them basically in their musical language, you know, using their names for musical syllables and that kind of thing. And it becomes quite clear that he's not just leaving it to them, you know, and saying, okay, this is sort of what the tune of the song is, and you guys come up with something good. Now, he's right in there. And I'd be interested in hearing what his discussions with George Martin were too, because, like I said before, the interplay between the orchestra and the Indian musicians, I mean, they're sort of imitating each other in a way. The Indian musicians will play a phrase, the orchestra will respond to that phrase, not with the exact same phrase, but with, with a logical musical answer, well, you know how the song goes, and there is that long instrumental section where there's a dialogue really between East and West, and
right.
And that's sort of the interesting complexity that he gives us, because also it's not a dialogue between East and West, with the West being the Beatles as rock musicians. It's basically acknowledging that this is an Indian classical style, and we're responding with a Western classical style. So he's the only Beatle on it, but it was, it was his moment on the album, or his 5 minutes on the album, and I'm really happy that they gave him the freedom to take that much space for a song really this complex.
Yeah. Let's move on to Magical Mystery Tour and Blue Jay Way, which I was very fortunate to visit a few years ago, and it's very exciting to ride up that street and to hear to see the place where that was inspired by that song, or that inspired that song, I should say. This is kind of like Within You, Without You, Part 2 almost, as far as I'm concerned. I love the lyrics, especially again if you see. I didn't visit during the daytime. Or at night I was there in the daytime. But if you see, it's a very hilly street. It goes up. There's a big incline there, and it's interesting to see that. But there was no fog the day that we visited, or no smog. At least I didn't see any smog. I didn't notice any. But I mean, it's a great song though. And the fact that he dedicated the song to the street. Alan?
Yeah, to me, this one is not quite up to the level that he'd been achieving. I mean, it's basically just a song about waiting for his friends to turn up and they've gotten lost. It doesn't really do an awful lot for me. It uses Indian elements in the sense of, say, a drone, except here it's played on an organ. Well, I don't mean that as the Indian instrument. Okay. In his Indian stuff, there's a drone instrument called a tambura, which doesn't play melodies. It just plays that like drone that underlines it all. And here he has the drone still there, but it's being played by an organ, And it's kind of interesting that he's taking some Indian ideas, but now we're putting it back in totally Western instruments. The non-Beatles sound in the song is really, the cello. So, there's some interesting things in it, but it's sort of not on the top of my George Harrison composition list.
Okay. Ask a policeman on the street. There's so many there to meet. Ken?
I love it a lot. I love the whole sound of the record. It's got the psychedelic feel to it, and I love all the backwards vocals that you hear in the stereo mix. That adds a lot to it. It's the whole arrangement of it. And like you said, Alan, the cello, it adds a lot to the song. The melody is just so different. It's I don't know how to describe it. I think most of the song, at least the verses, are all on one chord, built around one chord. And I think what George does with it melodically is just so unique. It's like a different melody from what you're used to hearing. Again, I'm talking about a distinctive style in his songwriting, which he had early on, and he continued with it then. And since they were doing psychedelic stuff then, like Eye on the Walrus, Blue Jay Way fit right in at the time.
Okay. Next is I'm going to pass Flying, since that was a written by all four of them, and go to Inner Light.
I love the Inner Light.
Do you really?
I really love that song. I mean, it is absolutely beautiful, and I think it was his first original on a single, and yet, much as I love it, it is probably the most pilfered of his songs. I mean, the text comes from I think it's from the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah, it is.
And almost exactly. I mean, he changed a few things, but not that much. And the instrumental, my impression was that it was basically something the Indian musicians were playing when he was working on Wonderwall, and he recorded it and put the lyrics to it. But now that we've heard the instrumental track that was on a bonus track on one of his solo albums in the box set, I'm not so sure about that. I think you hear a little bit of interaction between him and the Indian musicians, as you do in Within You Without You on the Pepper Deluxe box. So maybe he did actually have more to do with the melody of that. But my impression before that came out was that this was a traditional melody that he fit the words to. But it's just beautiful, and it's another Indian piece, but it's much more concise than Within You Without You, and because it has the Tao Te Ching lyric, it's definitely got this sense of ancient wisdom. Without going out of my door, I can know all the ways of on earth.
Arrive without traveling.
Right.
That's yeah.
Or the farther one travels, the less one knows.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
I always use that to get out of going places that I didn't want to go. But, it wasn't always convincing to the people who wanted me to go with them.
Ken, your thoughts?
I could pretty much echo the same thing that Alan just said there. I think it's, I love the fact of the economy of the song, that you can say so much, and it's, a brilliant piece of music in 2.5 minutes. I love the words to it, even if George did pilfer it. It really captures the Indian philosophy. Like we said, the farther one travels, the less one knows. You don't have to travel to know everything on earth. You can figure it out all, in your head. And, it's great. It's on the one hand, I love Within You Without You because it's so brilliant, all the work that was poured into it for 5 minutes, and yet the Inner Light is also beautiful in its own way, being half as long. So, I love it. I kind of wish, and I wonder if, now that we're talking about these Indian songs, do you wish that maybe George had done a whole album of songs like this?
That would have been
as opposed to Wonderwall music, which was instrumental, but songs with lyrics. An entire album of the Inner Lights and Within You Without You. It would have been so... I think at the time, I don't think the public would have caught on to it quickly. It would have taken a long time for people to appreciate it as they do now.
Right. I wonder if Olivia's sitting on any tapes.
Who knows? Okay, now we go to the White Album, which really has a whole... probably the biggest collection of Harrison songs there is. The ones that made the album, which would have been, which were While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Piggies, Long, 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 and Savoy Truffle, and the ones that didn't make the album, Not Guilty, Sour Milk Sea, Circles, and Dehradun. Talking about the ones that they used, obviously the one that gets the most respect, I suppose, is While My Guitar Gently Weeps, for obvious reasons, because it's such a wonderful song. And, I'm so, one of the great things, you can say what you want about bootleggers, but one of the great things they did was put out that demo, the acoustic demo of While My Guitar Gently Weeps first. That was an absolutely stunning piece of music, and I'm really glad for those of you that have seen the Love show, that you get to hear that, because they, although it's not, it's been, as Alan was saying earlier, they've added things to tracks in that show, and they put a symphonic arrangement on that song, but it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, that's enough to make you to put tears in your eyes, especially on that sound system there. And then there's Piggies, which is a more, George commentary, long, which I guess is kind of more is a little George being a little romantic, and then Savoy Truffle again is a little more sarcasm. Yeah, sarcasm. But anyway, you guys want to?
I think the unadorned "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" demo is on Anthology 3, isn't it?
Yeah.
I
think you're right. Yes, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean,
Bootleggers got there first, of course. But
Bootleggers did get there first. They did get there first. But yeah, I'm glad that they put that out. I'm surprised that I would guess that maybe Ken, you play it probably, but I would think, but it's not something you hear on the radio on FM radio very often, and it's too bad because it really is a great version of that song.
I have heard it, but then that depends upon the radio stations that I listen to. But there's one station on Long Island that is a rock station, and they play a lot of Beatles anthology stuff and demo stuff, and they do play that. And I hear more the one that's on the anthology, just George and a guitar, more so than the Love one. But yeah, it does get some airplay, and certainly on Beatles shows it does. But that just tells you, I mean, for a song that's such a classic, and what can you say about the White Album version with Eric Clapton doing the great guitar solo on it? And yet you hear it just with George alone on an acoustic guitar, and it's so beautiful by itself, just like that. It's like, it has a life of its own, just as the demo.
Right.
It could have been released like that to begin with, and it would have fit on the White Album that way with all the other acoustic stuff that's on there.
Right.
So that was a stunning demo. It really was. But yeah, certainly one of his greatest songs.
And we may soon hear another one if they put the Esher demos out on the White Album 50th Anniversary Edition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've heard it, but we may hear it officially.
Right. Hopefully we will. Hopefully we will. Anybody want to say anything about Piggies? I think that's probably one of George's best lyrics. Because I mean, it's like Taxman all over again. But George's humor again takes over.
And I think we get the humor musically too, because by adding the harpsichord to that, he is setting up a particular vision of a sort of stuffy end of society. I don't mean to imply that harpsichords are stuffy, because I love harpsichords, but I think that the picture he's drawing, almost required that kind of formality, because he's he's skewering that part of society, and so musically, I think it works really well too.
And sticking in the sound effects too with the Piggies. Ken?
Well, wasn't the song also inspired by Animal Farm?
I don't know.
The book Animal Farm? I think George might have said something about that. But yeah, social commentary right there, and I love the humor involved. What they need's a damn good whacking. Lines like that.
And according to I Me Mine, I think that came from his mother.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Remember Piggies, as well as While My Guitar Gently Weeps, also had another verse too that wasn't used in the Beatles recordings.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then there's Long, which I don't. That one doesn't hit me real hard for some reason. I mean, it's a good song. It's just in comparison to some of the other George Harrison songs, this one is kind of on down near the bottom of the rung. But I mean, the lyrics are great. So many tears I was searching, so many tears I was wasting. I mean, the lyrics are beautiful, and you can kind of guess what inspired that.
And very
But
dramatic drumming on it too.
right.
It's actually kind of a sleeper in a way because there's a lot going on in it, but it's very quiet and subtle. And I think the more you listen to it, the more it kind of reveals. And there's also that sort of haphazard effect or accidental effect of something that was sitting on the amplifier shaking and being caught by the microphone towards the end. That they decided to keep, and it's kind of a neat sound.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the feedback and I Feel Fine.
Mm-hmm.
That was a mistake, but Long, 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 is another one of those songs that you could interpret as being a love song for a woman, but George did say it was about God.
Mm-hmm.
He did say that. So, and he also said it was influenced by the chord progressions from Bob Dylan's "Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands." I love the fact that it follows Helter Skelter, and I think that it was intentional that you had such a loud, raucous song like Helter Skelter going into one of the quietest intros on Long, Long, Long. And then, all of a sudden, this thunderous drumming from Ringo in his fills. I mean, that makes such a difference in the song. But I love the melody of it, and I love that cool ending, So I like all the songs that George wrote in the Beatle years. It's hard to say that this is at the bottom, but no, I love the whole sound of it. I love the sound of his voice and how it was mixed. It's one of those songs that I appreciate more now than before. So
okay, and next is Savoy Truffle, which is a nice. It has a rock and roll beat to it and some great lyrics. The lyrics are actually kind of fun to sing when you look at them. Yeah. The lyrics are kind of are fun.
In a way, it's a little bit like being for the benefit of Mr. Kite in the sense that John got a lot of the lyrics from the poster and George got a lot of the lyrics from a box of candy. He mentions all the different varieties of candy in this box, and is I think what it's about Eric Clapton's Sweet Tooth.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he really liked chocolates a lot, and he had cavities a lot. So George is making fun of that.
Okay. And next is we're getting kind of close to the end of the list. Not Guilty from Anthology 3, which is an outtake and also another instance of George's sarcasm. The words to that are very. I don't know. I guess you could almost call them bitter because of what had happened.
Yeah, there is a lot of that song reveals a lot of tension within the Beatles. I mean, because that's just what it is. I didn't mean to upset the apple cart. I mean, that's pretty open. And you get the sense that not guilty for making friends with every Sikh. It's sort of like he feels as if he's being sort of blamed for Maharishi and putting them off course, and although he at the time he still believed in the Maharishi. He persuaded John that Sexy Sadie, originally called Maharishi, was ridiculous. He did not believe the Magic Alex stuff, and he continued to consider that valuable. And I think that the end of that, with John's sort of acidic approach to getting out of there, I think bothered him. So it's interesting. I mean, I could kind of see why it didn't make it onto the album. That's another instance where I would love to hear the internal discussions in the group about whether to put that on. But yet the fact that it went through 102 takes or more
Yeah,
It kind of,
that is kind of weird.
yeah. So they sure did a lot of work on it, and I like it as a track. I like the
Hmm.
Beatles version much better than his solo version.
Not me.
You
Do
know,
you really?
yeah,
No, I
yeah.
definitely George's version's better.
I like that stinging guitar sound that he gets, and
Yeah.
the combination of the guitar and keyboard. I just like that. I found the solo one a little lighter, a little more
Did you?
No, it's
disappointing.
very laid back.
Yeah,
It's a
Hmm.
very laid back version.
yeah.
But the
Hmm.
only thing about Not Guilty, I mean, it's got a lot of bite to it, the Beatles version, but that guitar riff that gets repeated over and over and over, it was really kind of overdone, you know. I don't know if the reason why the Beatles didn't release it had to do with what he was saying lyrically. They may not have been happy with the performance that they captured.
Hmm.
I think that guitar riff was just way too repetitive, and it was more controlled on the George Harrison version. I like that one much better.
Hmm. Okay. The next three songs we're not going to discuss fully, but they are Sour Milk Sea, Circles, and Daradoon. The first two were used on the done for the Escher tapes, which may or may not, we hope, will get released. And Daradoon was in the anthology. So let's move on to Yellow Submarine, where we have Only a Northern Song and It's All Too Much. And I adore both of these songs, absolutely. And it was I don't know if you can call it a life-changing moment, but several years ago when they re-released Yellow Submarine the first time, was it the first time? And I saw it in San Francisco. Seeing All Too Much in glorious with the glorious stereo soundtrack was just absolutely amazing. That was just fantastic, and it's going to be great this time around too. But those two songs in Yellow Submarine were just spectacular. I mean, Only a Northern Song was great lyrically. I mean, he kind of ribbed the other Beatles in it, but All Too Much was just over the top fantastic. I absolutely love what he did with that, and it's too bad that 8-minute version or whatever it is that has floated around on bootlegs doesn't get released. Really a shame. Ken?
Only a Northern Song I like a lot for the comical aspect of it. It's really making fun of the publishing company, the
Hmm.
music publishing company. I don't know if it was making fun of John and Paul,
No,
like you had said.
well, no, I said it was just kind of it was kind of, you know, elbowing the other guys. I mean, because they were all involved with Northern songs too. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it was making fun of John and Paul, but
Mm.
it did have, he was commenting on the Beatles, as a, it was a Beatle thing he was commenting on. So go ahead.
And It's All Too Much I love to death. I mean, I look at it as being his All You Need Is Love. It's got that same, universal theme to it. It's got a great melody, great arrangement. I love bringing the horns in too. I mean, that's what I think of. It's a great song by itself. It's hard not to think of the Yellow Submarine film when you're thinking about it, but it's a wonderful song.
Hmm.
All the world is birthday cake, so take a piece, but not too much.
Right.
Right.
Every now and
Now,
then you get the sprinkling of these humorous lines in George's songs, and sometimes you overlook it. You don't realize, the humor involved, but later on you do.
Alan.
Yeah, yeah, I like these two songs too. I mean, Only a Northern Song was a Pepper outtake, and I can see how it doesn't quite belong on Pepper. I mean, it's a little bit dark, not so much dark lyrically because it's humorous, but it has a kind of dark late night kind of sound, and it's sort of a completely different character from the rest of the stuff on Pepper. But I've always found it kind of humorous because for people who followed the Beatles really closely, everybody knew that Northern Songs was the name of their publisher, and that in itself was in a way a kind of here it's a pun. It's a Northern song, meaning it's a song published by Northern Songs, or is it a Northern song because George, coming from the north of England, wrote it? making it a northern song geographically. I mean, in a way, there's a lot of there was a lot of talk always between northern and southern England and the differences in culture. Even to the point where Ringo, when he's walking around during Hard Day's Night and is being hassled by, I guess the female bartender, he says a southerner, there's that. So there's that, but it has that kind of nice spacey psychedelic effect, but really what gets psychedelic is the other one. It's All Too Much. I mean, opens with that big burst of feedback. Now we're using feedback way beyond I Feel Fine. Now we're almost into, not quite into Hendrix level feedback, but more like that, more using feedback as a musical element that can be modified rather than just sort of, with I Feel Fine, it's just the sound of feedback. Nothing is done with it. But here he's got the feedback, he's sort of hitting on the whammy bar so that it wiggles a bit, and then you get that whole song with as you said, the brass and the organ and all kinds of stuff. And I agree that the 8-minute version would be great. I think they should put that out somehow. I don't know where they would do it, but I guess if we have a 50th anniversary Yellow Submarine set, which of course we won't, that would be the place.
Well, they may, but will we be around to see it? That's the question. God, I shouldn't say that. Never mind. In any event, let's talk about Old Brown Shoe, which is such a great song, and it got tapped on the back of the single, but it's a great song on its own. Alan?
I really like the song, and I'm beginning to sort of realize as we go through these all together that one of the things I like about it is something I like about a great many of these songs, which is George's use of different textures. And in here we have the piano that McCartney's playing, and it's funny because the thing ended up on a B-side, and it was a while before it got collected onto an album. But it was a B-side that you were really, really drawn to, and it's got a bit of that humor as well. I mean, Old Brown Shoe itself, I mean, the whole concept of that being the subject of a song, it's just a lot of fun, and there's a lot of, again, the textures, the bass line is incredible too. And I had thought that was Paul because it's a very virtuosic bass line, but turns out to have been George, right?
Yeah. He did say that in an interview that he gave with Cream magazine. I think that was around the time of Cloud 9 when it came out. So, yeah. It's a very interesting bass line, especially in that middle bit, during When I Grow Up, I'll Be a Singer. Yes. That part, there's this really fast bass line, it goes like that. But that's probably a little tricky to play, I would say. But it's really interesting.
I would think so, too, because, I mean, the strings on a bass are so thick and heavy, and to play, that fast on them, that's why I always thought it was McCartney. But it's funny that he very strenuously objected to the notion of playing bass when Stu left, and they were trying to figure out which one of them was going to do it. But he turns out to be a pretty hot bassist himself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At various times there were role reversals in the Beatles.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like John playing bass on The Long and Winding Road, or John playing lead on Honey Pie, and
Paul playing lead on Taxman, of all things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Okay, now we go to.
Well, I didn't say anything about Old Brown Shoe.
I'm sorry. Say something, Ken.
Old Brown Shoe is a tremendous song. I love everything about it, and I really think, looking back now, I don't know how successful it might have been, but I think it was really strong enough to be an A-side. I really think it was catchy enough. And sometimes I think that maybe, just maybe, This song might have been influenced by Hello Goodbye, because Hello Goodbye is loaded lyrically with all these opposites. And it's the same thing with Old Brown Shoe. I want a love that's right. Right is only half of what's wrong. I want a short-haired girl who sometimes wears it twice as long. There's all these opposites in there, just like Hello Goodbye was. But I love the whole build-up in the song. It's tremendous. I love the whole bass line. Just knowing that George played that, I find really fascinating. And the drumming's outstanding. And I think I might not have thought about it as a B-side when it first came out. I probably listened to it more when it was on the Hey Jude album. And the fact that it was on 1967 to 1970, and I play that album a lot, probably made me appreciate it more back then. But I love it even more now. It's just one of those songs that really cooks. It really works great as a live song. I love the version on the Concert for George, too, with Gary Brooker. It really works very well as a live piece of music. Outstanding song to me.
Okay. We'll move on to Abbey Road, and we will discuss probably two of George's greatest songs, and that's Something and Here Comes the Sun. And Something is kind of an amazing achievement for George because it was recognized as a masterpiece by a renowned rock and roll hater, Frank Sinatra. And that in its own, that's really stunning. But Here Comes the Sun is also a great song. But the lyrics on Something, I think that's the attraction for everybody. I think that's, if there's a more brilliant love song lyrically than that, I don't know it. It's absolutely fantastic what he did with that song. And I've heard, several versions. I've heard a fan of Sinatra's. I've heard many versions of him doing it. And he absolutely, like I said, he was, especially in the 60s, in the early 60s, he hated rock and roll. He always disparaged rock and roll, but he realized that this was such a great song, and he recognized that. Even though at some point he got confused and called it a Lennon-McCartney song, he corrected himself later on. But and he also used to instill his own little style into it, and use it, say Jack after some of the after the lyrics, incredible. Here Comes the Sun too. That's a very beautiful song. But anyway, Ken?
What can you say? I don't want to say this is the two greatest songs in George's career with the Beatles. They are two of the greatest. I love the whole body of work of all the songs that he did. But when people point to those two songs as being the highlights of Abbey Road, and I love all the other songs from Abbey Road, it tells you something. Something is one of the greatest love songs ever written, although he did write a lot of great love songs in his solo career, and I wish that some of them would get the attention that Something has gotten. Something's just a beautiful piece of music. Lyrically, the bass line's fantastic. That comes from Paul. Although George, I think, complained that he was a little too busy on the bass on the song. But everything about it, sometimes you overlook something like the orchestration that George Martin did on that, because you're so wrapped up in the song and how beautiful the melody is and everything else, and George's iconic guitar solo. But everything about that, it's a perfect package. And Here Comes the Sun is so brilliant in its own way because it's actually a very complex song. At least I think so anyway, in terms of its musical structure. There's a lot of different time signatures in it. And you got to give a lot of credit to the band, and especially Ringo, for his drumming on Here Comes the Sun. And it's very interesting drumming altogether. There's great drumming on Something. Yep. Don't overlook that as well. There's so many great things you could say about all Beatle records, but Here Comes the Sun is also a stunning piece of work in a lot of ways. I love the sound of the acoustic guitar on that song. So wonderful. Yeah, it's great. What can I say?
Here Comes the Sun uses in some ways the same trick as If I Needed Someone with that D chord, but obviously goes in a completely different direction. And I agree, these are two incredible songs. And since we're talking about George's development, if you look back to the beginning of the list and Cry for a Shadow, Don't Bother Me, You Know What to Do. Yeah, he has come an immense distance, in the 5 years between those early songs and Something, and Here Comes the Sun. Something, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Ken pointed out, the orchestration, everything else, the bass line. I have a feeling that his comment about Paul being overbusy on the bass line may have been sort of an echo of Paul's criticism of George's original idea for guitar lines in between the lines of Hey Jude that Paul rejected, which worked when Wilson Pickett did it, by the way. Yeah, so I have to say, what really put it over for me, I mean, I always loved Something, obviously, but when The Love Show was going to open, I did an interview with Giles Martin at a recording studio in New York, and he brought his hard drive and played the music from his hard drive. And so we're talking about really no generation loss and no compression for CD or anything, but right from the master tapes to his hard drive. And you could hear the pick on the guitar strings. You could hear, the orchestra sounded so exquisite. I mean, that was really one of the highlights, of that afternoon listening to these things. And when I wrote the piece, after I filed it, the editor said, "Could you say a little more about what it was like hearing this stuff in the studio?" and I said, "Yeah, it was really the best time I've had while fully clothed." And she said, "I am not putting that in the New York Times." But yeah, I mean, it's those are incredible songs, and what. In the context of this show of ours, what they show is this incredible distance he came, and also, looking at the middle of the list, I mean, the amount of variety of things he did with the Beatles is really stunning. Mm-hmm. Not that we're at the end of the list, but
no, we're almost at the end of the list.
Although chronologically, those are the end, right? Because we go to Let It Be, those things were done before Abbey Road,
right? Right.
Although I Me Mine was done.
That's true. That's true.
Okay. So actually, yeah, we are down to just about the end of the list with the Let It Be album with For You, Blue, and I Me Mine. And both of those, I don't know if after what he did with Abbey Road. Well, again, we're talking about the songs before Abbey Road. They're both great songs. They're both kind of similar in the way that they're stylistically similar. I do like them both. I Me Mine I like for the lyrics. For You, Blue I like for the music. Ken?
I like both. Well, I wouldn't say they're great songs. For You Blue is a fun song, good blues number, built on, typical blues chord progressions. Mm-hmm. But it's a fun track to listen to. It's fun to hear Go Johnny Go, George saying that in the middle of the song there. I Me Mine is very biting. I love the song because I think that, it has an edge to it. Although we do know that they had to extend the song by repeating the same verse over so that it would be over 2 minutes long. Kind of like I'll Cry Instead, the longer version in a way. Mm-hmm. But I like both those songs. I want to keep trying to not associate it with All Things Must Pass because most of the songs on All Things Must Pass, the album, I like more than those two songs. So, but they're good. They're very good songs.
And, strangely enough, he ran through so many of the songs from All Things Must Pass during the Let It Be sessions and couldn't manage to drum up a lot of interest among the others. Mm-hmm. And even I Me Mine, I mean, he played it for them. It's in the movie. And that's why they had to recall the Beatles on January 3rd, 1970.
Yep.
To come in and do it, and John was away, so he's not on that. John is actually not on a number of George's songs.
That's true. And towards the end,
yeah, and I think they just decided that since that worked cinematically, to have I Me Mine in there, they had to have him come in and do it, or have them, and they came in and did a really short performance that, as you say, had to be looped. But it's a great song, and it, it's a little bit, I associate it with Not Guilty in a way. I don't know that he's talking about the other Beatles necessarily, but given the squabbling and, all of this, is I Me Mine all through the day. I Me Mine, I Me Mine, I Me Mine. It's, I could see how that might have been what he had in mind. But of course it applies generally to a lot of people in the world. So, I'm glad that it ended up in the film and therefore required a finished recording, because the finished recording is actually pretty good, looped though it is.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have gotten so caught up. The time has run us by, and we're going to tell you how to get a hold of us. First of all, if you want to get a hold of the show, you can write to Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com. We have a Things We Said Today Beatles Radio Fan Facebook page. And also thank Michael Lynch for composing the theme song for the show. And to get a hold of me, you can write BeatlesExaminer at gmail.com. I have a Beatles group called Beatles News and Information, and I have a little piece of news. You will soon hear, for those of you that are Monkees fans, I will be on an upcoming episode of Zilch, the Monkees podcast, talking about my recent interviews with Michael Nesmith and Mickey Dolenz, which, by the way, both of them talked about being at the Pepper Sessions, and maybe we can discuss that at some point down the road. But in any event, Alan, how can people get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest way to get a hold of me is on Facebook, where I am two places. I have an Alan Kozin page and an Alan Kozin remix page. So either of those will get to me. Okay.
Ken, how can people get a hold of you?
My email address is everylittlething@att.net, and be sure to visit my website, which is kenmichaelsradio.com. As I mentioned in every show, there's weekly Beatles trivia where you can win one of 9 prizes, and I have a brand new prize to give away, and this one is especially nice. We talked about this in a previous show. Just reissued the 4 complete Ed Sullivan shows with the Beatles, and that's a 2 DVD set. It's got all the performances from the 4 shows, 3 from 64, 1 from 65, all the other acts that were on the show. So you can watch it the way that many of the first-generation fans watch the show and experience it as it was first broadcast, as well as the TV commercials, too. That's part of my trivia page. And I also want to make a quick mention that this coming Saturday, which is June the 9th, I'll be one of the MCs at the Fab Four Music Festival at the Oakdale Theater in Wallingford, Connecticut. There'll be 20 acts from New England, Beatles tribute acts performing, 10 indoors, 10 outdoors. I'll be either the MC or one of the MCs for the outdoor shows. So come and say hi if you can.
All right. Thank you, Ken. And thank you, everyone, for listening to us and looking us up on YouTube and Podbean and wherever your podcasts are found. For Ken Michaels and Alan Kozin, this is Steve Marinucci saying thank you for listening, and who knows, we will be back before you know it. See you next time.